Welcome to Never Rewrite. I'm Isaac Askew.
And I'm Jeffrey Sherman, and today we're going to talk about effective bug bashing. This came up, Isaac had been working on a project, and when he started, he walked in, and there were lots and lots of bugs. And so, he said, hey, a great way to get started and learn the code is let's go fix the bugs. And so everybody
Mhm.
was started logging and fixing random bugs, and that was
Right,
good, but not very effective.
right.
And so then you came up with a system where you started herding the cats to a more effective system. So why don't you tell us about what you experienced and how you got it to be more effective?
Yeah, so like you said, at first what we were doing really was just grabbing random bugs. The client basically said that they were in bug hell and they needed to reduce the bug count. And so it was all about we're at, a bunch of bug tickets in the JIRA and we want to reduce that number. And that was the
Mm-hmm.
metric. It's just like get the bug count down and we'll feel happier. Um,
Closed
so
won't fix all of them. Then boom.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So we needed some parameters on that. So at first I was like, okay, I'll just go ahead and grab a couple of bugs just to get kind of like just conceptualize what's going on here. Just jump in the code base, get familiar with it, see what kind of
Mm-hmm.
bugs are popping up.
It's my favorite
And
way to
so
learn a code base.
yeah, just to dive right in, and that worked. And people were just kind of fixing the bugs in the queue. But then later I was asking, okay, now that I'm grabbing, like, basically I just told them to give me some softballs, some don't give me tickets that are like ones that are huge refactors of some situation or would require a lot of knowledge, but just some easy ones to kind of help me understand. I think that's kind of
Mm-hmm.
what you do with even junior developers when they hop on and like you're trying to get them acclimated. You give them a couple of easier tickets or things that you think would be easy, but you just haven't gotten to because they're lower priority.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so as we start working through those, then I'm asking, okay, well, what are some of the higher priority ones? And they go, well, this is just the queue we're working with. And every now and then somebody will go through and say, hey, here's an emergency, or a customer is complaining, and they create a new ticket, and then that's the bug ticket that you work on. So I'm like, well, how do we get through our backlog effectively then? Like, like how do we know, besides a customer complaining, that this is an area that's like a big important area to work on versus just kind of
Mm-hmm.
reacting to it? And at the time, they didn't really. That was the priority. It's just like essentially, if a customer complains, that's your priority, right?
Reactive.
It's very reactive. Um, and so you can, we were. I realized I was working with somebody, and they were working on this calculator. The calculator was buggy. It was like a square foot, how much to charge per square foot kind of calculator.
Okay.
Um, and I asked, okay, well, how many people use this calculator? And the answer was like, I don't think anybody uses it. And I'm like, well, do you think or do you know? Do you have any metrics on how many people go to this page? And they were like, no, we don't have any metrics or like Google Analytics, nothing. So they
Hmm.
have zero idea how much traffic is hitting this page. So I'm like, well, how do you know it's worth fixing? Well, it's broken. And I'm like, well, if nobody uses it, who cares if it's broken? Like, there's 1,000 things that could be broken on your site right now, and if nobody navigates to them, why are you working on it? Like, sure, it's important to fix a broken thing, but maybe there's other areas, because I know they also have like email sending, text
Mm-hmm.
messages, invoice sending, all these other things that are super important and critical to their application. And so I'm thinking, okay, every time you work on one of these calculator bugs that you can't quantify as even useful, you're not allocating resources to those mission critical bugs that we definitely know exist, right?
Okay. So
So
to reframe that, they're fixing random bugs, and
mhm,
because they're attacking bugs randomly, they are attacking some useful, important bugs and some things that maybe shouldn't even be fixed because they should be deleted.
sure.
And so, okay, so how'd you go about coalescing to getting, and you wanted them to herd them to fix the more important bugs.
Yeah, fortunately, I had some help with this. We had some people who are a
Mm-hmm.
little more experienced in like the product realm and like backlog grooming and kind of some of these normal rituals that exist in an ecosystem. But essentially, what we wanted to do was classify which bugs were like to go through all the bugs that exist and tag them, like put them in different categories, see if they're very similar to other bugs that are already reported, so that you don't like. There was a lot of cases where people were like, "Oh, I think I fixed that 2 months ago. This looks very familiar," and it was just the same bug popping up, but it hadn't got merged yet because it didn't go through approval, and so
Whoa.
there was a lot of going through and then flagging things as duplicate, flagging things as potentially related, and then categorizing things based on like the feature. This is the invoices section. This is the square footage calculator, miscellaneous tools section.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and then after we had them all categorized, then there was more of a priority. Okay, this is invoice related. This is high priority because it's affecting people currently. This is invoice related, but it's like a stylistic kind of thing, and it's lower priority because it doesn't block anybody's thing. People can work around it.
Okay.
So it was super important to basically go through all your tickets to make sure that they're unique, and that if you're working on something, that all the different tickets that could be related to it are attached to it. That way you're kind of aware, or somebody who's worked in that area recently, and they go, oh well, John has just tinkered with invoices recently. We had another bug come in. Was that related to the fix that he just tried to implement? Is it completely unrelated? Or, at least kind of pull somebody in so you can start to develop a little bit of context around different areas in the application.
Now, if you hadn't started by everyone pick bugs and fix them at random, do you
Mm-hmm.
think you could have gotten to, oh no, we need proper backlog grooming? Like, if I understood the context correctly, in this case, you got brought in as a consultant, and like with a
Mm-hmm.
staff augmentation team, and so there were, I'll say five. I don't know how many. Five new developers on the project, and the client says
Right.
we're in bug hell, and you said, okay, cool, we're just going to grab 10 random bugs and fix them just to get our feet wet.
Yeah.
With the value of looking backwards, do you think you would have been able to effectively do a grooming session and prioritization if you had tried to do that first instead of jumping in and just fixing a couple of random bugs each?
I think so. I think for me, I liked jumping in and fixing the random ones just to get my head wrapped around the system, because sometimes it gives me some context for those conversations where people were
Mm-hmm.
talking about prioritization of different areas and whatnot. Like difficulty of changing certain areas. I'm like, oh yeah, I just saw that code and I can see how that would be super difficult. Or like especially if you're doing priority stuff, if you're trying to determine what's the easiest or the biggest impact for the smallest amount of change. That's kind of hard to say if you haven't looked at some of that code. And I'm not pretending that from a few tickets I suddenly knew that much about the code base, but to me it's just more about painting context. But
Mm-hmm.
I think it's just as valuable even if you've never even looked at the code. If you've at least communicated with somebody and said, hey, we do want to have this prioritized, we might go ahead and give some tickets to people now, before now, to get people working on something while we work in the background of prioritizing
Mm-hmm.
which ones you should work on. But you guys should consider making this, or you go ahead and grooming this for everybody. Otherwise people are spinning their wheels tackling things no one cares about, while customers like, I'm going to leave you tomorrow unless you finally fix this crap.
So it's an interesting question. So why do you think the client didn't have, right? They've hired a staff augmentation team, which is expensive. And so they
Mm-hmm.
had the money and they had the resources for that, but then they didn't have any idea like, oh, well, yeah, maybe we should have prioritized the work that we were going to have you do. They just kind of like left it like, whoa. What do you think was the disconnect there that caused them to not like preemptively try to prioritize?
I imagine it was just fast growth.
Hmm.
And so you have a lot of customers. The customers are complaining. They're complaining about specific things. And so you have a finite amount of resources. So if you've got just a
Mm-hmm.
few developers working on their complaints, but then there's plenty of other bugs in the application that you haven't gotten to yet. So at some point, you're going to end up um, with people just reacting all the time. And they also didn't have any tests in place. So you had regressions from those same kind of changes
Ugh.
as they're making those changes. So you're not really making much headway because you haven't locked features into place, and then growing bugs separately. Also, I know that this client happened to purchase this um, repo, purchase this SaaS application from another person. So they
Mm.
inherited it, and then suddenly we're trying to tackle all these bugs, deal with a bunch of customer complaints, while things are kind of like you snowballing, so to speak. And so if you're money minded and you're thinking, my biggest clients and biggest customers are worried about this, I need my developers working on this. You don't necessarily think in your mind, oh, I should get everything categorized in a queue of like what's most important to work on, because they think I know what's so important to work on because I know the guy giving me the most money is voicing this concern. That's the most important to work on. But until you actually start tagging those things, you can't really see trends in that,
Right.
especially if you are actually working in those areas and the bug count's not going down because you're not locking that functionality into place.
Yeah, I think that's a good point because it sounds like there was a bit of I'm going to hire these devs. I'll just get them doing something, and then that will hopefully get me enough breathing room that I can have them working more effectively.
Yeah, if they see I have 300 bugs, let's just get people working on those bugs, get the count down. It's like a hydra, right? You cut off one head and three more pop up if you don't have these tests in place that are making sure that things don't, that you didn't just
Regress.
accidentally undo the functionality another person just fixed because you weren't aware of the context here or what really needs to happen. There's no documentation for how it should behave. Everyone's new to this. Everyone's inherited this. So there's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people stepping on each other's toes because they don't know what to fix. It's not as simple as like, here's your conveyor belt of fixing things that come to you, and then we'll be at the end of the conveyor belt, because every change you make puts more stuff at the end of it. Um,
Gotcha.
so until you classify and dedupe, then you're just working and creating infinite work for yourself.
Okay, so let's switch to advice for let's say you're a manager
Mhm.
and you've got a bug problem, right? You've got 100 bugs in your backlog,
Yeah,
and what do you recommend? Now that you've got some more experience and they want to have a bug bash.
yeah,
Let's say like we got 100 bugs in our backlog. We got to do a bug bash, and this is the manager persona. So like, okay, I've got 100 bugs. I've got 5 developers, and before I let the developers loose because I'm wrangling this time away from feature development.
hmm
What would the things that they should be looking at and thinking about in order to optimize to groom their list ahead of time?
well, the first thing I would do is, if the developers need work, may as well go ahead and just train them and say, everything you do from now on should have tests. Let's get test coverage going. If you don't have it going, just go ahead and install PHP unit and start writing some tests. That way, all the time you're spending trying to understand your backlog and bug tickets, they can be working on something, right? It's
Right.
better to
Even
have
if
them
you're not
writing
using
tests than
PHP,
subdivision.
install PHP unit. Got it.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. My brain's in PHP world, but yeah, yes, whatever.
It's
A
all
testing
PHP,
framework,
man. Turtles
right?
all the way down.
But yeah, the first thing I would do, like the advice I give to people, is just make sure first you need somebody on your team as you're going through and trying to understand priority that is very close to the customer. It doesn't have to be
Mm-hmm.
like the CEO or CTO or whatever. It can be a product person who's very well in touch with customers and their complaints, um, support even, because they deal with issues every day. I know this is a problem area because everyone's calling in complaining about this particular area. That'll give you some context. Um,
One
Go
thing I
ahead.
recommend is when you write, like if you are writing a bug ticket, explain not only the bug but also the customer impact. Because I
Yeah,
get a lot of very dry bugs, and if you and it's great. Like it's very like when this thing happens, then this thing does this, and then it doesn't work. It's like okay, cool. That tells me exactly what, but
right,
there's no why, and of that why is important a lot of times because the why the context there often gives you an idea of why the bug happened in the first place, but also gives
right,
you it exposes you to the idea and makes you think about the impact to the customer, which helps both you prioritize and then somebody coming along 2 weeks later,
yeah,
oh the the foo widget. doesn't work under this circumstance. Well, I have no idea if that circumstance is common or not.
That's a good call out. Either that support person or the product person, whoever's on your team that is your connect essentially with the
Mm-hmm.
customer, they should be putting that in the story, like the impact, because that's super useful. I think we talked about this in a prior episode as well, is like making sure from a developer point of view that you're asking, why am I working on this, and understanding
Mm-hmm.
that business context, because you shouldn't just be handed a story and work on it um, just because you think, oh, someone complained about it, so it must be important. People write Jira tickets for everything. It doesn't mean they're important. So to continue along that flow is like, once you have that person on your team and you can start categorizing, it's nice to have a categorization of everything. Um, there is some when it comes to like what to work on. Like, you don't necessarily have to have things categorized if you're like an email marketing company
Mm-hmm.
and then you have bugs that are email marketing related. Those are probably, you don't have to have a whole big bug bash to understand that deliverability is probably important. And if it's not delivering, something's bad. So you can
Yes.
have a little bit of that context there. But installing analytics, or at least having some kind of understanding for which pages are the most used and like verifiably the most used,
Mm-hmm.
can help you deprioritize the other things. So if you have a bunch of other bugs that you see in your system and you're like, well, should I work on these? You can easily understand after you prioritize or categorize things into which buckets are like not as important,
Mm-hmm.
right? So again, there's a little bit of, you should be able to understand things. There's some areas are going to be important regardless of what comes in and how you flag things. But there's another level of things, like once you start categorizing, you will start seeing trends in certain areas. Maybe you're an email marketing company, but a lot of people are using your CRM lately. Well, you didn't know that until you had some kind of analytics, and now you see a lot of these bugs are related to CRM, and maybe that CRM is an upsell. Then that's a little bit of importance that you can tie in there.
Right.
Same
If
thing,
you
you might know that email marketing is going to be a super important category, and the bugs you come in, you're like, oh, this is an email marketing bug, so it must be the top. No, it might be a lower priority one that maybe it's a feature in your WYSIWYG editor that like one person uses. It's broken. It's email marketing related, which technically is your bread and butter. So you, by default, you would normally be prioritizing that as your number one thing, but it turns out it's like for people including an RSS feed, and maybe like 10 people use RSS feeds versus like
PTSD there,
a million
Isaac.
people. Yeah, yeah, right. So like, even if you categorize it correctly, it doesn't tell you how useful it is. So
Mm-hmm.
all of that will paint a picture. So you need analytics for how many people use it, marry that with complaints, people actually giving you some temperature checks from customer support and product, and then you have a good picture of like, ooh, this is a really low priority bug in the highest visibility area of our application, but it's still a low
Mm-hmm.
priority bug. And this is a very high priority bug in our tangential feature related area that we do as an upsell. So it still actually trumps the other low priority bread and
Mm-hmm.
butter bug. You can't make that distinction until you know use, until you know how many people are traveling to that page, using that page. Um, then once you've got everything categorized, then you can start delegating a little more effectively.
Okay. So mixing the developer and the manager hat right now. If
Mm-hmm.
you don't have good categorization, right, and you don't have the analytics, you're working off an old, right, you're going to do everything perfect from now on, but you've got a lit backlog of 100 things.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any advice on how long to try, like, how much time would you spend trying to categorize versus be like, you know what, screw it, take the 10 most recent and start there versus let's try to categorize this 100 thing backlog and,
Yeah,
we could knock off 10 random ones or we could categorize the 100 and then still
I
have
think the
100.
categorization is pretty important. Like, even if you can't categorize easily, like, start categorizing, and let's say you don't have the analytics, like this
Mm-hmm.
client didn't. Well, that's a great feature for you. Go ahead and give to your developers currently. Install analytics, install Google Analytics, install Mixpanel, install something that can start tracking how many people use this page and which areas of applications are useful. And while you guys are busy doing that, which is very useful dev work, we're going to spend a week, if it takes a week, having meetings all day, going through every single bug and marking that as a won't fix, a duplicate, categorize it with a tag in a certain area until you get through all of
Mm-hmm.
that. Because until you have a certain understanding there, like, and then you don't have a process around all the different bugs that come in, then you're just basically just grabbing random things and spinning your wheels. You're wasting money, plain and simple, time and money. And so if it takes a week, that's totally useful time. No one can make the argument that because you took so long understanding what is the most effective thing to work on, we wasted a week of me uh, fixing bugs at random that could be completely useless ones, right?
I
Uh,
could totally see
you need to
someone making
know
that
what you're
argument.
working on. So, like, yeah,
I'm
they
not
could
saying I
make
would
the
agree with it,
argument,
but
but that's essentially saying,
that the
yeah,
same kind of
that's
people who
essentially
say we
saying
don't
I'm
have
going
time to
to
write
head this
tests.
direction to my ship. Yeah, yeah, you can disregard that. Though. It's like sailing in a direction and going, well, at least I have a direction. And you're like, well, you're not going in the right direction. You're not making progress. You just feel like you are because you're sailing finally. Like we should orient first, then sail. And spend all the time tooling and installing tooling that you need to orient yourself before you start chewing through a workload. It makes no sense to go because it feels like you should go. You know, my 2 cents.
Right. If we're going to go with the sailing metaphor, pointing the ship in the right direction and saying, I'm sailing in the right direction and ignoring the wind is not going to work very well.
Yeah. So all of these other
Um,
things, installing the correct tooling, categorizing things effectively, pulling in people who are experts with the customer and what they're complaining about, will help you orient your ship in the right direction before you start aimlessly just sailing for the sake of sailing.
cool. So one last thing. So now that we've gone through it, do you still recommend or accept the idea of, hey, if you're coming into a new code base and you have an uncategorized backlog,
Mm-hmm.
would you do what you did last time, which is just jump in with a couple random ones just to get your feet wet? Or would you immediately say, hey, no, let's immediately go into grooming before we get our feet wet?
I would go straight into grooming. In my case
Hmm.
here, we actually had a team that was experienced at grooming, and so they got to work on the grooming, and I was an engineer, and I was like, okay, in that case, I'm going to get acclimated with the code base while you guys do all the
Okay.
prioritization work.
So
So
somebody
I'm
else was
happy with.
was
Yeah, if it's up to me, then yeah. If no one's doing it, I need to be doing it because I need to make sure I'm working on the right thing. But in the meantime, we actually did just that. We installed Mixpanel. We got insight on what we're working on, and then I worked on a couple of tickets just to get acclimated with the code once we were ready to prioritize or to be handed already prioritized tickets. Um, but yeah, in general, I would like to know what direction I'm headed first.
awesome. Uh, I think we have squashed this bug. I'm Jeffrey Sherman.
And I'm Isaac Askew, and this is Never Rewrite.